Oh, okay.
Tell you later.
All right, so I have this.
I don't know what you do.
Would anybody mind just, introducing yourself just for my benefit? I know Howie myself, I know.
Barry Friedman.
Barry Friedman.
Mishra. Harry Tattlebaum. Yitzhak Isaac.
Yitzhak Isaac.
We're all from different names.
So your last name is Isaac?
Also.
Oh, you mean to say Yitzhak Isaac? Isaac. Wow.
It was Isaac.
Now, why is that making noise? You don't know. That's your phone or my phone? I thought I shut off my phone. Is it standard here? All right, we'll see as we go along if we need it. I usually do understand, but now I think I sat down and so I got lazy. So we'll get started.
Go ahead.
With Marv at 8:30.
So Marv is at 8:30.
8:30.
How long does it take to get there? 5 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, so we'll get to Marv.
Yeah. No, I'm saying just unless there's a later.
Okay. Now I have to say by introduction, two introductions. One is introduction. Oh, how are you? Okay. So one introduction is that this is a long, complicated topic. I don't expect, and I hope you don't expect that we'll finish it in 1 hour. It's at least 2-3 hours. But you got to start somewhere. And I think if we do well tonight, we'll have set up a framework.
Would you like to?
I have it recorded here on my computer, so I'm safe. Okay, then if Arthur wants to record it for your group, that's up to you. I don't know. Okay. Now, my second introduction is to tell you what this sefer is and how I got a hold of it. The author of this sefer is Rav Moshe Rotberg, and he's a Rav in New Jersey in Tom's River, New Jersey, which is part of Lake, not officially, but it's part of Lake. And I got a hold of this sefer during the COVID period. Not that we're finished with COVID, but during COVID, I used to give a series at the Emek Learning Center in Emek Rephaim on contemporary issues in COVID. And somebody in America told me that it might be a good idea for me to get a hold of this sefer. What's unique about this sefer is that he is very much connected, this rabbi, with the Hatzalah in Lakewood. And he's sort of like the unofficial posek for them. And unfortunately, during COVID, he got calls and questions all the time. So that's number one. Number two, I've gone through a number of svarim. COVID generated a tremendous amount of literature in halach. And this is one of the few that I shouldn't say this officially, I can tolerate. Because I think he does a good job. Okay, so this is what we want to do. So if you have these pages, then the first page, which may say Ayin Gimel on the top left, you can make that out. Yeah? Ayin Gimel?
Yeah.
Okay. So he has a list of questions that he had. We're going to look at questions number 3 and 4. So we're going to skip the first two because they're less relevant to our discussion. Although they're fascinating questions in and of itself, there's a question here about violating Shabbos to give antibiotics to someone who had COVID. But that's not what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on what I call non-conventional medicine. And you'll have to tell me because I'm not in any way an expert in that area. I'm just using that term. I hope I'm not misusing it. The first question you'll see as number Gimel, which will be Gilel Yom. So he gets a call from a person whose father is being hospitalized. And the man's situation is really deteriorating. And the son who's asking the question had heard from a woman about something called a mishcha. He doesn't go into details, so we can only guess. A mishcha is an ointment that obviously you rub into your skin. And apparently this ointment has brought some very good results for seriously ill COVID patients. However, the point that we want to make here, and this is a critical point, before we get into the issues of Chil Shabbos and Chil Yontif, is on line 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of this paragraph, which would probably be line 8 from the top of the page. It says, Shalafi harofim, if anyone needs a pen to underline this, because this is crucial, to borrow my pen, Shalafi harofim, ein ze ela shtus veheva. You hear that, my friends?
The Mishcha.
This mishcha is shtus veheva. It has no therapeutic medical value whatsoever. And again, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but keep in the back of your mind the pigeons. You know what I'm talking about, hepatitis. Okay, then?
Right.
I have people, some in my own family, who will swear on a stack of Bibles that the pigeons help, and they work miraculously. They come and they suck out the hepatitis. And the doctors, what do you say? You had it. And the doctors will probably, again, don't quote me on this. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm only using it as a theoretical analogy. The doctors would probably laugh at it. And that's what we're seeing here. And the doctors claim, listen to the language, Ein sikui ba'olam shi'azor. There's not even a chance in a million that this ointment is going to have any beneficial results. But the mishpacha says that there's it's worked in the past, there's some chance that it might help. In order to get access to it, they have to send out a car. It's not readily available. It is pikuach nefesh. I'll tell you why. Because this person, his situation in the hospital is deteriorating at a rapid pace. And I can only tell you again, I don't want to get anybody depressed about this, but my father-in-law died of COVID. And you and I may know other people who died of COVID. And this is early in COVID. Your mother-in-law died. So my father-in-law died and your mother-in-law died. Maybe they're up there in heaven trading secrets. Why don't we get that ointment? It's a joke, Joe.
If the person thinks it's going to help.
Right, even the psychological effect.
Excellent question. Yeah, that's called Yisuve Daita.
Right.
And the truth is that if the father himself would have asked for the mishcha, then almost definitely the post said we're going to be machal
Make
shab.
him feel better.
Exactly. That's called, you should get the literature, the language is very important. I always, Bruce, if I had a whiteboard here, I'd write on the whiteboard, called Yisuve Daita, in Hebrew, Yishuv Hadas. Like, again, I don't want to get off on a tangent. This is a major issue in halacha. Can a husband accompany his wife to give birth on Shabbos for Yisuve Daita? Okay? Next, number Dalet. Okay, listen to this. This is an even more radical.
Well, Yom Tov Sheni has anything to do with it? Because we're
Not
now
really.
doing a
No,
Drabanan.
he's going to talk about Shabbos itself.
Oh.
But in the next question, which is number Dalet, he speaks about the Hatzalah people. And as I told you, he's like the final posting rabbi for the Hatzalah people in that area. That they took a patient to the hospital on Friday night, and he was begging. He was begging. Do you see that? Bikesh meant B'Bechir Rabbah. They were asking B'Bechir Rabbah to call on the phone on Leil Shabbos his Rebbe, his Hasidic Rebbe. And they said, don't worry, we'll call right after Shabbos. No, he said. My situation is Pikuach Nefesh, and my Rebbe, Al Yedei Birchaso, Vadai Yatzileu. He'll definitely save him.
Wait, how is the Rebbe going to answer
Right.
the phone?
It's not Shabbos.
So-
It was
No, Leil
Friday
Shabbos.
night in the States. His Rebbe is in Israel.
So
It's still
to have-
Friday morning here.
Right.
So the Rebbe would answer.
Why?
No,
no,
no, how he goes.
Wait, we're not in New York now?
No.
We're in Teaneck, New Jersey. We're not-
But it could be the opposite. It could
No,
be.
no,
He's in-
Like I know.
Friday night. Can't
I
have
made
it.
up when I made up a sign for my brothers when my parents were badly sick. Okay, and we said, if anything happens on Shabbos, we give a call, let it ring twice. The next time we ring 3 times, and the next time you start picking up.
I'm sure that they had something similar going on for the Rebbe. He doesn't tell you which Rebbe it is, but could you imagine the Belzer Rebbe or one of those Rebbe that have thousands upon thousands of disciples? So Howie, your question is a good question, but it's more a technical question. Somehow they could get the message to the
He
Rebbe.
had an answering machine, he can hear the
Also,
recording.
Yeah, whatever
also
it
the
is.
Chassid believed in the Rebbe's prayers much more than the
Exactly.
Rebbe.
Oh, I don't know about that. Let's face it.
Okay, that's it.
Anyway, listen what happens. He tells you the following, that they told the Choleh that they would call Friday night on Shabbos. If Tichula, why did they do so? They didn't intend to call on Shabbos.
Yeshiva does.
Exactly. That's what I want you to underline here. Mahmat chashash yituvei das. That's what the concept I told you before. And again, you're allowed to lie in this case if it's yituvei das, but there's no need to call the Rebbe until after Shabbos, unless you believe, excuse me, that the Rebbe is going to save you. And I'm sure there are thousands upon thousands of people who would swear on a stack of Bibles that the Rebbe is going to save you. But this is what you call non-conventional medicine. Now, where did I get this concept? Yeah, go ahead.
Some points around it.
Great. One of them answered her. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that was the Rebbe.
That was this guy Friedman. He's a real left.
There's a lot of underlying things here, but I didn't know this. I've learned that 20, 30 years ago.
All right. Go ahead. So what we want to study tonight is the halachic status of medicinal applications that are not medicinal, meaning they have no scientific basis. You cannot prove to a Bucky, the word Bucky means a scientist, a medical practitioner, you can't convince him that this is going to help at all. Does the halacha still consider it when there's no issue of yituvei daito, meaning we can circumvent yituvei daito by doing X, by doing Y, either the wrong guy asked the question or we're going
Or you
to
can bring
lie
him-
to him and
You
so
can
forth.
bring him a cream and say, this is it, you know?
A placebo. Okay, perhaps.
No, it's not a, it's just cream that might
But
make
what
you
is the
feel better.
halachic status of this medicine? It's working. He says that there are people swearing that it worked, it helped. We can't explain it
So
scientifically.
rather, listen, Dr. Rich, Yale trained epidemiologist, big movement, says now it's a problem because doctors need these studies, which are very expensive. Done by their doctors on the street, they know what helps the patient, and therefore it's relying upon governmental bodies telling you what.
But he's not talking about governmental bodies at
But
all.
he's finding the doctors know. The doctor thinks it's going to help. And the patient here thinks, the doctor, that's what you can rely on. You don't need
Okay,
scientific evaluation.
okay, wait a minute. You know what,
It might accrue later.
Bruce,
one
so
way or the
here's the
other.
question. Well, I think that when it comes to these issues of life and death, we have to say to ourselves, we know nothing. What do I mean? The halacha is a self-contained system. You could guess, you could give your intuition, you
No,
could,
the doctor, any doctor says he believes it's
But-
going to help. That's all you need.
I don't, is that a halachic
That's-
statement? Are you sure of that? Have you gone through the sugyas in Shas? That's what I'm asking. Do you follow what I'm saying?
No,
In other words,
I
again,
just- but
the
it's
question
common
is,
sense. Doctor, you named it.
the question is, do you want to study the halacha or do you want to just pontificate on your own? That's the issue.
Yep.
The way I was brought up, I walk into my Rebbe's shir and I'm an amart. I know nothing. I don't know what halach is. I can guess. I can tell you about cultural mores. I can give you moral directives. I can give you intuitions. but I know nothing until I have halachic source. And so far, all I have is 2 questions. And now what we're going to do is we're going to see a rabbi who is in the trench, he's in the mud there, he's in, what do they call it, the trenches. And he is now going to try to take us by the hand through a wealth of halachic literature. This is Torah, this is halacha, this is something that comes from a higher world. What are the sources? That's what we want to do, Rabosa. We want to see the sources. We want to study them.
The rabbis are also saying this matter.
I don't know. I don't know. Right now, we're not up to that stage. We're only trying to get to
But I
first
don't think
base,
being a rabbi and a
and that
doctor.
is to try to study the sources.
I've been just saying doctor. Because there are many doctors. One feels this way, one.
Really is a big one. Well, he's opposed to. He's also.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, so he has some sources that we're gonna see. So.
That's what I call the Chevron Yeshiva. In the Chevron Yeshiva, they say Rashi comes in, says 1 or 2 sentences, then he goes out, and he goes back out if we find it out.
That's good.
Okay.
So we're up to tshuva on the bottom of the page, and we're going to start with the most important siman, I would say, in all of Shulchan Aruch, of 4 halakim, that siman shin chaf chet. Students who are studying for ordination will for smicha will spend endless hours just trying to take apart this siman that deals with life and death issues. Although it's specifically Hilchot Shabbos, but it applies in many different areas. Whenever you have to violate a law of the Torah, again, unless it's the big 3, then we go back to Shin Chaf Chet. And there's a very fascinating Magen Avram. Magen Avram lived about 5 centuries ago, 4.5. And he says the following, that in order to violate the Shabbos, for a chola sheyesh bo sakana, we're talking about a person who's definitely in a life-threatening situation, and we want to violate the Shabbos for refuah, be'inon, we require shetehei refuah yedua o alpi mumcha, which means that we need an expert in the field who knows and recognizes that illness and tells you exactly what refuah would be required to try to save this person, or alternatively, a refuah yedua, a well-known medicinal procedure for this particular illness, even if we don't have a mumcha, we don't have the expert, but it's got to fit into one of those 2 categories. You have to either be an expert or this is a refuah yedua. And everyone wants to figure out, where did the Magen Avram get this from?
He's very clear that it has to be a refuah yedua. How does that fit together with experimental drugs?
So that's what Bruce was talking about before, where we haven't tested it out yet.
No, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about pre-COVID. I'm talking about when you're talking about cancer or something like that, there are in the area a number of things which are experimental, haven't been yet, but they're not approved, but they are sometimes offered in last-ditch situations.
Correct. So again, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, Howie, that the mumcha will tell you that it's worth taking a chance because there is some sort of basis for our assumption that it operates and it helps. And now, in order to shed light on this Magen Avram, we go back to the source of everything. How do we know that we violate the Shabbos for the sake of pikuach nefesh, to save a life? So before we see that Gemara, which is on Daf Pei Hey, that's 85 in Masechta Yoma, first we want to start with a very interesting Gemara on Daf Pei Gimel. And that's going to be a segue. What does it say on Pei Gimel? A person was bit, how do you say bitten? Bitten by a rabid dog. And there's a machlokes, a dispute amongst Tanoim in the Mishnah about whether we will allow him to eat what apparently they believed would be something that would help in this case, and that is kill the dog. Well, that's a good idea anyway. And not whiskey. We love whiskey, but I'm talking about a rabid dog. Okay.
I also love it.
One question was about letting a woman eat it.
We'll get to that. Just have to hang in there for a few minutes. Everything's going to come in its time. We're just trying to develop this logically, step by step. So the first step is to understand a controversy in the Mishnah itself regarding feeding a person who is bitten by a rabid dog the liver of the rabid dog. And Rav Masya ben Charesh, he was the first Tana. He says, Mishin Eshachol Kelev, Shota, Kelev Shota is a rabid dog. Ein Machiuno so Michotzer Kaved Shalo. According to the Rabbanon, the first opinion, we do not take apart the dog and feed because a dog is not a kosher animal. It's treif. And therefore, to feed him from a treifa animal is not permissible, says Rav Masya, mutter. You're allowed to do so.
For medicinal purposes?
Correct. That's Rav Masya. So Rashi says, the afal pisha nogim arofid berafua zu. Now watch what Rashi's saying. The rofim themselves, the doctors, will use this method. They'll administer this method. But says Rashi, I underlined this, I don't know if it came out in your photocopy. Eina refua gemura. Lahatilo isur behema tmea al-kach. Rab Masya ben Choresh matir, dikasover, says Rashi, the refua gemura he. Rashi has coined a new phrase, and we have to rack our brains to figure out what Rashi has in mind. He calls it a refuah she'ena gemura. And that's the sheet of the Tanna Kama, the first Tana, whereas Rav Matya holds that it is a refuah gemura. It sounds like there's a concept out there called refuah gemura. Everybody agrees unanimously that in order to violate an Isur Torah, like in this case, Behemoth Tmeya, we need a refuah gemura, whatever that means, a refuah gemura, I'm just using Rashi's language. Machlokes is, in a particular case, this particular method doesn't meet up to the standards of refuah gemura. And according to Rashi, that's exactly the debate between the Tanna Kama, that's called the Rabbanan, and Rav Cher and Rav Mas. Do we define this as refuah gemura? And Rashi is admitting that nagim harofim b'refuah zu. Now Rashi himself contradicts himself, sort of. He himself, Rashi, calls it a refuah. But then he says, wait a minute, okay, it's a refuah, and the rofim will administer this. But it's not a refuah gemura. In other words, he is now doing something amazing, Rashi. He's setting up a higher standard, a more demanding standard than the rofim would, in order to permit the violation of, in this case, achilas behemoth me'ah. And the highest standard is, don't just tell me that the rofim administer this methodology. Tell me that it's a refuah gemura. And until you can convince me that it's a refuah gemura, you cannot violate the Torah law. There's something that's not a refuah gemura.
I mean, something that definitely will help.
I don't know. I can't figure out. What does Rashi mean? It's a very ambiguous term. If Rashi would have told me, look, we don't use this method. No rofe who's worth, who got a, he has his diploma up on this, who has a license from the government. No rofe would use this. As we saw before, the rofe was saying this is a joke. It's meaningless. It has no scientific basis. We would never even dream of it. That's one thing, but Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says, Afal Pisha Rofim, they will use this refuah, but it's not a refuah gemura. What does that mean? It's not a refuah gemura. How do you qualify for a refuah gemura? If you turn to the next page, we should say Ayin Dalet on the top right. He writes that Divrei Rashi Tunim Hezber. We really have to figure out what Rashi has in mind. Rashi says that Harofim Nagin came, but it's not a refuah gemura. What does he mean? Well, what does he mean? Rashi adds, and this is the punchline, it's not a refuah gemura. What does he mean? If the Rofim are implementing this methodology, apparently they think it works. And we're talking about, saving lives here.
Well, what
He says,
what
Ari,
could be the other reason for the Tanakama saying you can't do it?
Maybe the Tanakhama would say that the Rofim don't use it, but Rashi's saying, no, it's a fact on the ground. Open up your local newspaper and you'll see that the Rofim use this method. It's in the books. It's in the medical textbooks. And yet Rashi says, no, we can't do it. Why? Because it's not a refuah gemura. Well, what kind of games are you playing with? What is this
makes
highest
it
standard?
refuah gemura?
I don't know. If I knew what refuah gemura is, I wouldn't, I'd be okay. But, the rabbi himself who authored this beautiful sefer, he opens up the paragraph by saying, Divrei Rashi Te'udim Hesper. We need a Pirush Rashi on Rashi. But Rashi didn't write a Rashi on Rashi. He says, Uma Kavanasa, what does Rashi mean when he says, She'ena Refuah Gemura? And he strengthens his question, his objection against Rashi. Hareafilu al tzad safek. When we violate the Shabbos, we don't know that it's going to work. We don't know that we'll successfully save the life of the victim. But nevertheless, we will mechal Shabbos. The Gemara has a case, we'll see it later on, where debris fell on someone. The chances that there's someone underneath the debris that's still breathing, that's still alive, is minuscule. And yet, we will violate the Shabbos. So what are you telling me here? You're telling me here that the Rofim will use it. Apparently, the Rofim was smart enough to figure out that the liver of a rabid dog is helpful. Don't ask me for the science about it. But they saw that it works. And no, we can't violate the Torah. Why? Because it's not a refuah gemura. What do you mean not a refuah gemura? It's not 100% foolproof. It's not going to guarantee you success. We don't need guaranteed success.
But what I don't understand, when you just compared it to the fact that if someone had a building fall down or is underneath, and there's this hashash of 0.5% that you might find something, you can violate Shabbos, right? Why can't you just simply say the same thing? There's a possibility, 1 out of 1 million people will get saved by this.
That's why it says on the top, Divrei Rashi Te'udim Hesper.
Right. I understand that. So I don't.
So you're just adding salt to the wound, which is okay. I like that idea. But we're going to try to somehow make some sense out of this Rashi. What is refuah gemura?
Okay.
Again, there's a little bit of an insert here, which I don't even want to get off on a tangent. He first wavers back and forth. Maybe the Gemara is talking about a case of somebody whose life is not in danger. He's just going to suffer a tremendous amount of pain and suffering. But he rejects that. So let's just leave it at that. We're talking about a chola sheyesh bo sakar. Now, at this point, almost out of a sense of frustration, because we don't understand Rashi, he quotes the Rambam. Now, if I understand correctly, Bruce set me straight on this. You have a shir in the Rambam on Tuesday nights, right?
The end of this while you're here now.
So we're going to now connect this to the Rambam. Okay. We can call it Rambam shir. The Rambam authored a Pirush HaMishnayos, a commentary on the Mishnah, and we're learning the Mishnah in Masechta Yuma on Pei Gimel. Says the Rambam. By the way, here, Bruce, you might ask me, can you get me a person who's both a Talmud Chacham and a doctor? Again, I don't know about the Rambam's medicine. That's a different issue, but the Rambam was a doctor.
By the way,
Ein halacha.
I left thousands of
Thousands. Oh my gosh.
and
Okay.
all of Nashville were my patients. So many doctors recommend other doctors did. Insurance.
I don't know.
Depends upon who you ask.
I can just tell you this, Bruce. I had three epidurals.
No more than
After each one, they asked me as a boy or a girl. And I can tell you, garnished health. The only thing that helped me personally was Sarna, if you know what I'm talking about. He really helped. Okay, anyway, not that I met him face to face. Okay, so the Rambam says the following. First of all, up on top, you should know, Ein halacha Rav Masya ben Cheresh. We do not accept the leniency to feed the victim of a rabid dog, the treifa. Okay, now I'd like you to underline the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 words. This is the Rambam's contribution for tonight. Hizeh eino moil ela b'derech sgula. Can you underline those words? Here's my pen.
They're underlined.
Oh, they're underlined, but double underlined.
The Rambam holds from schools?
Absolutely not.
That's why.
The Rambam is fighting against school. See, Rashi is fighting against a refuah she'ena gemura, but the Rambam is going to give us some sort of an insight as to what is this refuah that we reject, that will not allow us, because we're passing like the Chachamim against Masya, will not allow us to violate the Torah law. What is it about this refuah that irks us, that we reject? So in Rashi, we have a very vague, ambiguous answer to that, which is a refuah she'ena gemura. Go dance on your head, do acrobatics in the air, and try to figure out what Rashi means. But at least the Rambam gives us a little bit more of an insight. The Rambam says, Kizeh, this methodology, eino moil, it cannot help Ella b'derech skula. Now, I'm going to ask you the following question. If you read the Rambam carefully, does this method help or not help? No, I want a definite answer. I want you to
It
read
does.
the text of the Rambam. Barry's
It does, but-
100% correct. If you read the Rambam carefully, the Rambam is telling you it will help. But it's b'derech skula. Or as my father-in-law would say, skila. You know, because he came from Glitzian.
Maybe their school.
I can never figure out how to translate the word skula.
But maybe the Rambam is.
You got to be a chassid, and you got to drink a lot of whiskey. You know what I'm saying? To know what a skula is. When I walked down the aisle to marry my wife, my father would put a Reuter Bentel around my that's a school. Go figure out what it
But
is.
the school of Rambam may be talking about is not a school, but psychological. Like maybe what he's saying is their school that will make the guy think you're doing something. I don't.
So wait, let's read the Rambam. You know what? Let's give it the Rambam a chance to. Ari, let's give the Rambam a chance to flesh it out.
Oh, okay.
He says the following: Chachamim sovrim, he ein ovrim al mitzvos, ela b'refuah bilvad. Ratza lomar, the Rambam himself tries to explain himself. Bidvarim hamarapim b'teva. Those methodologies that help within the natural universe. What is Rambam again implying here?
Not schools. Not.
But
not-
again, are there
not-
methods
not-
that could be helpful that are not al pi teva? You and I would have thought the Rambam would say, absolutely not. It's bonkers. It's ridiculous. It's like believing in the zodiac and what do they call
Astrology.
Yeah,
Astrology.
right. But what's that thing called? The
Horoscope.
horoscopes. Horoscopes.
Right.
You believe in horoscopes? We're not going to believe in horoscopes. The Rambam is a rationalist. But to Lomar, we can only violate the Torah for refuah bilvad. What's refuah bilvad? But to Lomar dvarim hamarapim b'teva. Udavar emes. Now, every emes has to be derived from the human mind. Hotzio adas. In other words, we can explain it medically, chemically. We understand how, this reacts to that, and that reacts to that. We can give you a rational explanation. Vanisayona, we've seen it in experience. Hakarov li'emes. Avalisrapos bidvarim shemerapim biskulasam. Again, the Ram for the third time is implying that these are valid, not valid, I should say, but they are operative. They're successful methods. But it's what? It's skula awesome. Why? He kocham chalush. We put them on a weaker level. Eino mitzad das vanisayon rochok v'itaina chalusha minat poet.
That's saying that there's some validity to.
Absolutely, the Rambam 3 times over.
Yeah.
I don't even want to use the word implies. He always says it outright that these are schools that are helpful. But yet the Torah does not allow you to violate the law for the sake of refuah, which is a school of refuah. It cannot be explained rationally. You don't know, and there's no justification based on cause and effect law in scientific reality. Then it's out of the question.
No, that's not the treatment on your unconventional. That's literally cutting up some ribbons and tying around your wrist, maybe to help, and maybe something. Saying, focus, the rest of it, that is. Doctor said, listen, that's been fully cut. Not FDA approved, not conventional, it might help. You can't preach here about how Shabbos work. It doesn't
You
reach-
see, the Rambam is not going to be happy if you just tell him it might help. The Rambam is saying, why will it help? If you can't answer the question why it will help, if you can't put it into a lab and prove chemically that A causes B and B causes C,
They knew.
then
Did
it
they
just
ever
doesn't
know?
rate. It's
Did they
called
ever know?
school.
Did they ever know? Did they explain?
Who's they? I'm not sure if you mean today, today's doctors or the Rambam's doctors.
Up until very, very recently. Just know that people say. Either.
Acupuncture. They know it was.
You had no proof.
Explain it.
You had no Western medicine, no Western. medicine
According to the
proof.
Rambam, if I read him correctly, again, I hope I'm doing justice. You know, the Rambam will come and laugh at me and say, "Person, you didn't understand what I meant." But if I'm reading it right, any of those medications that you mentioned, if you cannot give some sort of explanation. Now, the only thing
There are
is,
explanations. There are explanations to alternative medicine, Chinese medicine.
I don't know.
There's a
So
lot of theory.
I don't know.
There's a lot of. there's a lot-
maybe I misunderstood what was said here. Howard.
Science, we don't like that. It doesn't make sense for a West, but you know what? It needs to be effective.
That's what I'm telling you. I don't think the Rambam will be satisfied just because he checked off the box and it seems to work.
Even if he's thoughtful.
He seems to be saying, again, I'm reading the Rambam, he says, we have to find a davar emet shahotzio midas. It's something that we could derive based on our logic. The only thing is, I don't want to confuse you because this confuses me. The Rambam also has the word nisayon. So that's just is going to, that's good.
Karov means you may not know exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe there's some gray area in the middle that you're talking about with aspirin and acupuncture, which the Rambam would say, well, we have nisayon. Maybe we have an inkling of an idea why or how it works, but it's not totally explained.
Does
You
the
know.
Rambam say anything in Mishnah Torah? I mean, this is Perish Mishnah Rambam we wrote. This is the first thing he wrote.
Right.
So then the Mishnah Torah, there are many times that he says something
Right.
else and he
So
says
I don't know.
Mishnah.
That's beyond
Like when
me.
he talks about
I'm just trying to my goal, Ari,
Hillel Shabbos, you know, like to be
my
involved.
goal is to understand
Right,
this
this Rambam.
piece. Yeah, that's I think this Rav Rothberg would have quoted other Rambams
Right,
if he
or
thought it
from
was,
the
but I
Mishnah.
can't promise
You know
you.
medicine works. What standard are you using? Well, go back to Rambam's time. How would you know? We can't do blind studies. We have no, what, you know, you give it to some people and most people end up recovering. But that doesn't always work either. So how do you know? Where do you draw the line?
But again, I can't answer all your questions, but I do want to formulate at least the Rambam in one sentence, which I think he does in the next paragraph.
Right.
And he says the following. He says, Osir lasos b'Shabbos on the second line. She'eno moil b'teva ki im b'derech skula. Umashmos dvarav chu sof kol sof moil. So again, those are the key words here. You know, it's right now at this point in our development, we just want to get the principle down, so to speak. We don't know all the nitty-gritty details and how to fit and answer every question. But at least what we've gotten to this point is that there is a formulation of the Shitas Rambam. Rambam Shita is we are not allowed to violate the Shabbos, or for that matter, any other Isser in the Torah, for something that doesn't work based on nature, but rather works b'derech skula. And the Rambam is admitting that it works.
So going back to what you're saying, you could have all the studies in the world with 100% success rate or whatever, a high success rate in these studies, but if we don't know how, we don't know the mechanism, the reps won't satisfy the.
But nobody knew the mechanism of anything.
I know, that's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say. We just don't know
You
just
can, but how can you
tomorrow.
say if it works most of the time that kocham chalush?
Correct.
In other words, how can you say, in other words, kocham chalush means it doesn't work most of the time. If not, then it's not kocham chalush.
Let's let Rabbi
No?
say, I think this will
I'm just-
become a little
yeah.
clearer if we see how the Rashba applies this. Look at the bottom of your page. The Rashba writes a tshuva about writing a kamiyah. You gentlemen know what a kamiyah is.
Yeah.
And he wants to know, can you write a kamiyah for a cholish yeshbo sakana or yoledes? A yoledes is considered halachically a cholish yeshbo sakana. And first he says, the inu tavi, if they demand it, meaning the chola, the client, the victim is demanding it, then sisuvei datai, we get in that concept. But what happens if they don't know that there's a kamiyah, or they don't know a kamiyah works, or they don't know it's accessible, and afal pisha einanu yodim imhu mumche. Now, back in the time, the person who wrote a kamiyah and different psukim and different osios, he was a mumche. He was an expert in that field. But we don't know if he's a mumche. But nevertheless, they're demanding it. If they're demanding it, then sisuvei datai. Avol in einam tovim. Let's get to the punchline of the Rashi, if you don't mind. Avol in einam tovim. Now on page Ayin Hey. Nobody is demanding it. Nobody is demanding a kamiyah.
What are the words?
No, you don't have it. Sorry. My fault. Ela Omar Chacham Echad, Yesh li kamiyah echad shemoil yosel choli. So somebody comes forward on his own initiative and he volunteers to write a kamiyah on Shabbos, and he knows that it's going to work. We're not convinced. He may think this is the perfect kamiyah for that disease. You know, like how he was talking about cancer medicine, right? We know how to write this kamiyah, but nevertheless, ain't kosvin b'Shabbos. What do you mean ain't kosvin b'Shabbos? There's a suffix here. We will violate the Shabbos for a 0.001% of saving his life. What are you telling me, suffix? Elam ken yodea di amche kamiyah. We know that this particular kamiyah has helped in the past. It's proven itself. By the way, it has to prove itself on 3 occasions. Or alternatively, imche gavra. This person on 3 occasions, this Chacham Echad, has written 3 kamiyahs, and he successfully healed the person. Tahainu, imachol toveh also fine. Pasha. Then there's no question about it that yisuvei daita. If we know it's going to work, and that was the last part of the Rashba, which is called that Yodea, we know in the past that it worked. Osha hu mumcha, we know that this person is a mumcha, then violating the Shabbos is okay. But in Eino Yadua, if we're not sure about it, Ein osim misafek. And in the next paragraph, he says, once again, we don't understand what's going on. What do you mean Ein osim misafek? We'll violate the Shabbos for any possibility. And he says, "Arei Rashi v'Rama mashbed afilia dua sherafua b'derech skula moila." Now, let's not identify the Rashba with the shita of Rashi and the Rama because they're not the same. There's a fundamental difference between the Rashba on one side and Rashi and the Rambam on the other. Because even if you would convince Rashi and the Rambam that this refuah works, let's say, for example, this guy's an expert and he has proven himself time and time again to be able to solve this problem by writing a kamiyah, we will still not allow it on Shabbos going to Rashi and the Rambam.
Maybe
Because
Rashi,
it's their skula.
but maybe Rashi would. Rashi didn't say skula, you're not allowed to do skula. It just said, well, it's not a
It's gotta
refuah
be
gemura, but that doesn't mean if a skula
Right.
happens to work, it could be refuah gemura.
But he's
Compared to
assuming
Rashi,
that
maybe not.
a refuah she'ena gemura, even though Rashi admits that it works, is something that's, writing a kamiyah is not something that you could identify as a refuah gemura. Rashi has refuah gemura and refuah she'ena gemura. The Rambam has derech refuah, derech mada, etc., and derech skula. So right now, for our purposes, we're sort of combining the two. But the point is that the Rashba implies that if the derech skula, I'm putting kamiyah into that category, would have proven itself time after time, then we would violate the Shabbos. The Rambam and Rashi are going much further than that. They are categorizing this refuah as derech skula, and they're completely excluding it. The Torah doesn't recognize derech skula,
Can I
whatever
just-
that means.
can I
The
just-
Torah just doesn't elevate it to the
But
status of a refuah.
Can I just ask something? Wait.
Please.
Rashi may have enough nafkamina between, because here we're talking about the person himself who's a chola in the kamiyah is not doing anything, right? The person with the tray food, he's getting tray food as a matami at nafsha. And it almost seems that Rashi is saying, I don't want this guy who's a chola to be matami himself with behema tmeya if it's not right, if it's not a real refuah. But a kameh maybe it can be a different game, because I'm allowed as a person to help a chol on Shabbos to do anything to help him. But I'm looking at the person, the chola, this behemoth tmeya is on a different level completely, right? I think they said that there's a whole thing by the Talmid Chachamim will never be nichshal ba'avera. And then they say, what does it mean nichshal ba'avera? So there's enough mina. It means they'll never eat something treif. But they can- Right.
He
But they say-
didn't eat tamar.
They didn't even try. So they won't eat anything treif because that's matami nafsham, but they may have done other things which they did over on, because that is not matami nafsham. So I'm wondering if some Rashi Dafka here, because he's emphasizing here, Isser behemoth tme'al. He wouldn't say refuah b'kach shelo vet. He's saying Dafka latirlo Isser behemoth tme'al kach to the person himself that is getting the food. And the kameh has nothing to do with the person. It didn't work, okay? So what? Okay, Seder. But the person is not, his neshama is not affected adversely because of it.
All
So,
right, are we reading too much into Rashi?
I'm not sure.
I think he's defining what the Isser is. Shabbos, clearly it's a question of Hilul Shabbos. Here, so it's an Isser of something trade.
Right, okay, but maybe,
It's
maybe,
defining-
I'm
defining the
I'm
Isser.
just not sure where Rashi, because we don't even know what Raful Gemara means. Rashi may say Raful Gemara may mean if the thing with the Kameh worked for 10 people, so according to Rashi, that may be Raful Gemara. How do the Rambam specifies it has to be something that's
Okay.
never.
So, and what
doesn't
about
say
Rashba?
that.
What would Rashba say about
Right.
a well-proven kamiyah? Would we violate the Shabbos?
No, he says you can't.
It's well-proven.
He said you
Either
can't.
one of
He
two
said
ways.
you can't.
Oh,
He said you can't.
Then you can. So
Right. So I'm
there's
not
a fundamental machlokas here. Again, where Rashi fits in, we
That's what, yeah.
were thinking Rashi's with the Rambam, but either way, the Rambam is absolutely opposed to derech skula, to violate the Torah law. And the Rashba implies that, yes, we will use the kamiyah. We will violate the Shabbos, which just has to be proven. For some reason, which makes no sense, the Rashba is only going to allow you to violate the Shabbos when it's proven. A suffix is not enough.
What is proven?
3 times. So we're seeing something opening up in front of our eyes. There's a fundamental machlokus about whether or not we would violate the Shabbos and write a kabiyah.
But what's
Clearly, the Rambam would be opposed to it because it's derech skula.
What's the Rambam's basis for saying that we don't allow derech skula, even if it's proven?
Because the Rambam holds that feeding the animal's liver is derech skula. That's what the Rambam.
Why on what does the Rambam base his?
Because the Chachamim say
on a derech
no.
skula?
Because the
That's how he
Chachamim again.
interprets the
Here's
Gemara.
A, B, and C.
How can
A, Chachamim in the Mishnah prohibit feeding, right, the victim.
Right, right.
What's it called? The liver of B. Says the Rambam, we don't know why the liver would help. C, says the Rambam, the Torah doesn't allow you to violate its law for a refuah shel skula. Comes along the Rashba. Wait a minute. Comes along the Rashba, and the Rashba says, yes, we will violate the Torah even for something that's skula. But the Rashba is one condition, which is sort of like a footnote, but a very important footnote. It's got to have proven itself. But once it's proven itself, despite the fact that it's derech skula, we will violate the Torah. The Rambam is absolutely opposed to derech skula.
How can you prove such a thing?
3 times over.
Let's say it's a work. It's like going to the, it's going to some care
Again,
bear. It's going to a care
guy is
bear.
dying.
Praying,
So
praying.
a guy is
So
dying.
somebody lived.
So
live.
somebody
Doesn't mean that's gonna
writes
happen.
a kamir. He's got psukim, he's got osios,
Okay.
he writes it on a cloth,
Yeah,
he administers it. And for that, and every kamir is different depending upon what illness you.
well, you have three kamiyot from three different people or three
Oh,
times
okay, so
that
that's a
work?
sugya in the Gemara. The Gemara
Okay,
goes
I didn't
back
know
and
that's
forth.
what- But
Okay,
what
you're
you're getting
machamis
to,
the whole
like,
sugya in
it's
the
like
Gemara.
you're building- So how many kamiyot did this Rav? I'm not trying to say anything, not, negative. But he wrote 1,000 kamiyot, and three times they were Yofi.
No. They have to work every single time.
Just had work three times.
Again, 3 out of 3. It's like a
He
shar
only
mua.
wrote three
If a shar
kamiyot.
mua on one
Right,
occasion was
right.
not no geah,
Right.
okay, again, I'm not going to do this.
It doesn't have.
So Bosa, I think we have about 5 minutes till 9. Am I correct? So no questions. I need 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes. On the bottom of page Ayin Hey. Okay, on the bottom of page Ayin Hey, if you take a look, we now fast forward 2 blot in Masechta Yoma, and we get to the critical issue, which hopefully will explain this machlokas about derech skula. And he says the following: the Gemara asks, it's one of the most famous Gemaras in all of Shas. How do we know that we violate the Shabbos or Yom Kippur for the sake of pikuach nefesh? And the Gemara quotes 2 opinions. The first opinion is Reb Shimon ben Menasya. Okay, we're on page Ayin Hey, if that helps anybody. 5 lines up from the bottom of the page. Okay, sorry. It's my photography. Okay, you have to get a new photographer. One of my dreams, Bruce told me on the side that maybe that base measure would be available. My first, how do you say in English, Giyus Ksafim, my first fundraising project would be to get a photocopy machine.
I think
They have one?
They have a printer.
The printer, yeah.
But that wouldn't help me with this, because this, I don't know how, this needs a photocopy machine.
Rational mechanism.
I don't know. Let me just see one Gemara. How do we know that we violate the Shabbos for pikuach nefesh? Reb Shimon ben Menasya Omer. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael es Shabbos. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us that the goal is Shmira Shabbos. Comes along with Shimon ben Menasya, he says to maximize Shmira Shabbos. And that means that we're going to make a pragmatic decision. We're going to give up on one Shabbos for the sake of many Shabbos. Chalel alav Shabbos achas kedei sheyishmar Shabbos sarbe. Upirish Rashi kedei shelasos Shabbosos acheros. So we might have to violate one Shabbos to guarantee more Shabbosos. By the way, would that apply to a non-Jew? Would we save, again, I'm not going into the issues of that. So please, guys, learn Lumdus. Learn Lumdus. If you don't learn Lumdus, you'll never understand the Torah. I'm asking, based on what we know here, without other,
It would not apply.
it would not apply. What about a mumar? A mumar is a Jew who's born Jewish, but he has never accepted Shabbos.
It still would apply.
Maybe yes, maybe no.
It still would apply because it's
Maybe about
So this is going to be a major machlokas between the Beis Meir and Rabbi Akiva. You should know about it. At the time, they were Karoim. You heard of the Karoim. My father told me in his shtetl there was a Karoi shul where he was brought up.
Considered non-Jewish.
They were considered mumrim. Mumrim means, again, Rambam has another term, tinokus shenishva. We always come back to the Rambam. They didn't get any education. It's the way they were brought up, and so forth and so on. We don't blame them. We don't judge them. But Lamaisa, they are not in the Shmir Shabbos mode. Yeah. And this is going to be a tremendous machlokas. But then the Gemara brings another opinion. Shmuel. And Shmuel derives Chil Shabbos from the sake of a cholet from a different source. The Torah says, V'chai b'hem, and you shall live by them. Chai b'hem v'lo sheyamus b'hem. Umehasam nafkalon. That's where we derive it from. Now we have a major machlokas. Is there a difference between the 2 derivations? Whenever we see 2 derivations, we rack our brains. Let's get back to the case of a mumar or a karoi. Is a karoi included in v'chai b'hem? Yes. Is he included in Chalel Alav Shabbos Achas B'Shvil Sheyishmar Shabbos Harbe?
You want to say maybe yes, maybe no.
No. Again, we're going to say no at this point, Howie. You're going to pray that we'll be Makarifim, but leave out Kiruv right now. The halacha sees him as muchzak. Muchzak means that the halacha works with chazakas, with patterns. And the Beis Meir says we will not violate the Shabbos for the sake of a karoi. V'tama Rabbi Kivega, we're now on page Ayin Vav, line 5, for anyone who likes to follow the text if it came out.
Yeah,
V'tama Agon Rabbi Kivega said. He wrote a letter to the Beis Meir. They were contemporaries. I think they lived in 2 towns near each other. Halo Karoi Mikri Yisrael Mumar. Karoi is Jewish. His mother was Jewish. His grandmother was Jewish, etc., etc. The Rambam calls him a Tinok Chanishpa. Lo Yadano, I don't understand the Beis Meir. Again, the Rabbi Kivega was a great fan of the Beis Meir, but I don't understand what he's talking about. Lama also Latzilo. Why can't we save him? The Heshiv al Zeh Beis Meir wrote back. We're getting to see now Chilufei Michtavim. Mabakach. Okay, he's not a god. I admit that. Mikol makom kol ikar heter, says the Beis Meir. Why do we violate the Shabbos? Is kadesh yishmar Shabbos is harbe v'tinok shenishba hareu bechezkes shelo yishmar Shabbosos. Again, bechezkas. Again, we live in a world of kiruv, so we're going to get a hold of this karoi. We're going to send it to the discovery program in the old city in their Eshat Torah. We're going to be makarim. But right now, the halacha works with chazakas. And the chazaka is that since he's been brought up on this poison, on this anti-halachic Shmir Shabbos, Shabbos to him is nothing. So it means, according to Magen Avraham, at the end of the day, if you can't guarantee me that according to the chazakas, if you save his life, he's going to observe the Shabbos, you have no right to violate the Shabbos, even if he's Jewish. Rabbi Kivega apparently held otherwise. What was his opinion? Just define him as a Jew. V'chai b'hem applies even to someone who won't observe the Shabbos. And it's fascinating because, again, you'll have to tell me if you want to continue with this, but there's a whole discussion about reviving the dead. Do you hear this, Rabbosai? Reviving the dead, if, we're going to talk about Elio and so forth and so on, and he's going to have to be Matame himself, and he's a Kohen, what would you say? Should we allow to Matame himself to resurrect the dead? Anybody? Here's the point of this whole shit that I like to hear from you. Until now, I didn't care what you had to say because we didn't go through the source with you.
Why not?
No, Howard. Why not is not an answer. You have to tell, whenever I ask you a question, the answer is, it depends. I was in Rav Soloveitch's class for 5 years, and I can tell you, whenever he asked a question, the answer always had to start with, it depends.
You have a paraduma.
No. Do me a favor, Arthur. Don't hock me with paraduma. I can't. I won't survive it.
Does it depend if what she's suggesting is rational?
No. I'm asking you based on what we saw. Were you following me, Rabbi? Whether we violate the Shabbos for a karoi. Wait a minute. Comes along the Beis Meir and he says we will not violate the Shabbos for a karoi. Why? Because he's not going to observe the Shabbos. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbos. Comes along Rabbi Kivega and he says, "V'chai b'hem." He's Jewish. We'll violate the Shabbos. Now tell me the answer. Could we violate the Torah law to resurrect the dead? Yes. Don't tell me yes. Tell me it depends.
It depends.
Okay, now tell me what depends on. If it's v'chai b'hem,
then wait. If it's b'chai b'hem, wait. Then it
After he's
depends.
resurrected, it's b'chai b'hem.
but he's not resurrected right now. How he's dead.
But he will
There's
be.
gestorben.
The
He's a dead man.
Shabbos Harbe are in the
Oh, so
future.
now you're talking. Now let's get together. If we accept Rabbi Kivega and v'chai b'hem is the motif here, we can't apply v'chai b'hem. He's already dead.
Why
But
not?
if-
But then he will continue living
Wait, let me
afterwards.
finish out. But if we're going to apply the logic of the Vishamu B'nai Yisrael Shabbos, and we're going to weigh one Shabbos against all the future Shabbosos, then what would be the answer? I don't care if he's alive, but then all I care about is his future Shmir Shabbos. Do you follow what?
But the Chaim
Rabbi say,
also
do you
was
understand
afterwards.
how geschmack this is? You have to make a bracha on this.
Right.
The man is opening our eyes because look what's happening. There's a controversy, and the repercussions are in two opposite directions. Are you following me? Two opposite directions. The base mayor was the one who said we're not going to violate the Shabbos for the Karoi, because even though I admit he's in the Chayim, but it's got to be B'Shem B'nai Yisrael, and he has a chazak, he's not going to observe the Shabbos. So who is the Machmir? Rabbi Akiva Eiger or the Magen Avraham?
Wait,
All right.
wait.
I gotta drink something here. Give me some whiskey here. All right.
Wait, the last thing you said, wait, the Magen Avraham?
Who's going to be the machmer on the karoi? And he's going to say we cannot violate the Shabbos.
Is
The base mayor. Why? Because the karoi has a chazaka.
Right, then he won't keep Shabbos.
Good,
Right,
and there's no vishamer.
right.
Comes over, Kivega says v'chayim.
Right,
So Kivega is the maker. He's the lenient.
right.
Now,
With the
what?
coin, it's
Now
not-
watch how we
Now-
switch sides,
Right.
where the coin is not a matame himself for a dead person in order to resurrect
Right,
him.
because he'll be.
Who's going to be the machmer now?
Rabbi Akiva
Rabbi
Eiger.
Kivega, because there's no v'chayim, he's already dead.
Right,
But who's going to be the maker? The base mayor. Why is the base mayor Makil? Because he will observe the Shabbos in the future.
What if he's
That's it.
If he resurrects him, he will.
Maybe.
If he resurrects him, he will.
That's what I'm telling you. That's why the base mayor would ask it that leniently that you would be that you would be machal the Torah for a dead person if
Chayim means you're alive.
he'll observe the
And
Shabbos.
therefore
will
you
be.
cut-
Okay,
and what if- wait, no, I'm Howard, what are you supposed to be there?
One other question, the Gemara, what is in the Gemara following the Mishnah that we started, what's the reason for the Tanna Kama that says that you can't give the covet for the killer? What's the reason?
I can only tell you what Rashi says and what the Rambam says. Rashi says because it's not a full Gemura, and the Rambam says because it's a
We
simple.
still don't know
There's
about-
nothing else said in the Gemara about it? Where it comes from?
It's a short piece of Gemara. It's like
But
a
we don't
very-
know really, we still don't know what Rashi means, right? We're still not clear.
Okay,
what
so you
Rashi
want to say
means.
because of Cholas Asuras. That's okay. So you'll have to write a new tshuva.
No,